Rome had fallen. For more than half a century, the Western Roman Empire was gone. Its provinces had been carved apart, its emperors were forgotten, and foreign kings now ruled lands that once answered to Rome. But then, in the 6th century, an emperor in Constantinople decided that Rome could rise again. And he found the man capable of making that impossible dream look real. His name was Belisarius. He would cross the Mediterranean with a relatively small army and destroy the Vandal Kingdom in North Africa. He would march into Italy and reclaim Rome. And when a massive Gothic army surrounded the city, Belisarius would stand behind its ancient walls and refuse to surrender. Thousands of enemy soldiers would come for him. They would build siege towers. They would attack the walls. They would try to starve the city into submission. But Belisarius would keep fighting. And somehow, Rome would survive. For a moment, it seemed the ancient empire was coming back. Carthage was Roman again. Rome was Roman again. The old imperial eagle was flying over territories that had been lost for generations. But there was a problem. Belisarius could defeat kings. He could destroy armies. He could take cities. What he could not defeat was the politics of his own empire. Because the closer Belisarius came to restoring Rome, the more complicated his relationship with Emperor Justinian became. And eventually, the greatest general of his age would discover a brutal truth. Sometimes, winning the war is easier than convincing your own emperor to let you win it. This is the story of Belisarius, the general who almost restored Rome. Part 1, The Empire that Refused to Die. For centuries, Rome had ruled the Mediterranean. Its roads crossed continents. Its armies had conquered kingdoms. Its emperors had commanded from Britain to Egypt. But by the 6th century, that world was gone. In 476, the last Western Roman emperor was deposed. The Western Empire fractured into a collection of kingdoms ruled by peoples Rome had once called barbarians. The Ostrogoths controlled Italy. The Vandals ruled North Africa. And Rome itself had become a shadow of the city that once dominated the ancient world. Yet across the Mediterranean, the Roman Empire still survived. Its capital was Constantinople. And its emperor was Justinian. Justinian believed that the fall of the West had not ended the Roman Empire. It had only interrupted it. He dreamed of restoring imperial control over the lands that had once belonged to Rome. But dreams are easy. Turning them into reality requires an army. And an extraordinary commander. That commander was Belisarius. Little is known about his early life, but by the time Justinian came to power in 527, Belisarius had already begun to distinguish himself as a talented military leader. He was not simply a brave soldier. His greatest weapon was his mind. Belisarius understood that battles were not always won by the army with the most men. They were won by preparation, by discipline, by deception, and by knowing exactly when to strike. In 530, he faced the powerful Persian Empire at the Battle of Dara. His forces were heavily pressured by a larger enemy army. But Belisarius prepared the battlefield carefully, positioning his troops and cavalry where they could strike at the decisive moment. When the Persians attacked, his plan worked. The larger army was defeated. And Justinian had found the commander he needed. Belisarius had proven that he could defeat powerful enemies with limited resources. Now the emperor was ready to give him a mission far more ambitious than defending the eastern frontier. He wanted Belisarius to cross the Mediterranean and take back Africa. The impossible restoration of Rome was about to begin. Part 2, The Fall of the Vandal Kingdom. In the year 533, Belisarius sailed west. Behind him was Constantinople. Ahead lay North Africa. And between them stood one of the most powerful kingdoms in the western Mediterranean. The Vandals had ruled North Africa for nearly a century. They had captured Carthage in 439. They controlled wealthy territories along the coast. And their fleet had once been powerful enough to threaten Rome itself. Now Justinian wanted it all back. But there was a problem. Belisarius was not leading a massive invasion force. His army was relatively small. Around 15,000 soldiers and sailors were sent toward Africa. If the expedition failed, there would be no easy rescue. The Mediterranean was behind them. The Vandal Kingdom was ahead. And somewhere beyond the coast was Carthage. Belisarius understood that his greatest advantage was not numbers. It was speed. He landed in North Africa and immediately began moving toward the Vandal capital. Rather than wasting time on unnecessary sieges, he advanced along the coast, keeping his army supplied and disciplined. The Vandals had expected a different kind of war. They expected the Romans to attack with overwhelming force. Instead, Belisarius gave them something far more dangerous. An enemy they could not predict. The Vandal king, Gelimer, quickly realized what was happening. The Roman army was approaching Carthage. And if Carthage fell, the entire kingdom could collapse. So Gelimer prepared a trap. His forces moved to intercept Belisarius near a place called Ad Decimum. The two armies were about to collide. But Belisarius did not know exactly where the enemy was. And the Vandal commanders did not know exactly where the Romans were either. The battlefield became a maze of confusion. Units became separated. Orders were misunderstood. Cavalry appeared where they were not expected. For a moment, it seemed that the entire Roman army might be thrown into chaos. But Belisarius kept his headquarters outside the confusion. He gathered his remaining forces. He reorganized the army. And then he struck. The Vandals were defeated. Gelimer fled. And the road to Carthage was open. Only days later, Belisarius entered the city. For the Vandals, it was a catastrophe. For Justinian, it was the fulfillment of a dream. Carthage was Roman again. But Belisarius knew better than to celebrate too soon. Gelimer was still alive. And he was gathering another army. The Vandals prepared for one final confrontation. At Tricamerum, the two forces met again. This time, Belisarius attacked with overwhelming confidence. The Vandal army broke. Gelimer fled into the mountains. And within months, the kingdom that had ruled North Africa for almost a century had effectively disappeared. The Roman Empire had conquered Africa. But this was more than the capture of a province. It was proof that Justinian's dream might actually be possible. If Belisarius could take Africa, perhaps he could take Italy. Perhaps he could take Rome. And perhaps, after decades of collapse, the Roman Empire could rise again. But Italy would be a very different battlefield. There, Belisarius would not be fighting a kingdom that could be destroyed in a single campaign. He would be fighting for the heart of the old Roman world. And the next target was Rome. Part 3, The Return to Rome. Africa had fallen. Carthage was Roman again. And Justinian now looked toward the place that mattered more than any other. Italy. For centuries, Italy had been the heart of the Roman world. But now it was ruled by the Ostrogoths. Their kingdom was powerful, organized, and deeply established. Taking Africa had been an extraordinary victory. Taking Italy would be something else entirely. In 535, Justinian gave Belisarius a new command. His mission was simple to describe. Take Italy back. The first target was Sicily. Belisarius crossed into the island with his army and moved against the Gothic defenders. The campaign advanced rapidly. The Roman army captured key cities, and the road toward mainland Italy opened. Then came Naples. Unlike some of the cities before it, Naples refused to simply surrender. The Gothic garrison resisted. Belisarius surrounded the city and searched for a way inside. Eventually, Roman soldiers discovered an unexpected route through an old aqueduct. The Romans entered the city. Naples fell. And now the road to Rome was open. The Gothic kingdom was beginning to collapse. Its leadership was divided. Its king, Theodahad, was losing control. And Belisarius kept moving north. Then, in December of 536, something happened that would have seemed impossible only months earlier. Belisarius entered Rome. The ancient capital was once again under Roman imperial control. After decades of foreign rule, Roman soldiers stood inside the city. The banners of the empire were raised again. For Justinian, it was a moment of triumph. But Belisarius knew that capturing Rome was only the beginning. The Goths were not finished. Their new king, Vitiges, gathered a massive army. Thousands upon thousands of warriors marched south. Their destination was Rome. Belisarius looked at the approaching army. He knew the numbers. The Goths vastly outnumbered his own forces. And the city itself was vulnerable. Rome's population had declined dramatically. Its ancient monuments stood among damaged streets and abandoned buildings. But its walls remained. The enormous Aurelian walls still surrounded the city. And Belisarius understood that those walls could turn Rome into a fortress. He ordered repairs. Defensive positions were strengthened. Troops were distributed across the walls. Weapons were prepared. Every gate was watched. Every weakness had to be found and repaired. Then the Gothic army arrived. Rome was surrounded. The siege had begun. Outside the walls stood an army many times larger than Belisarius' force. Inside were Roman soldiers, civilians, and a commander who knew that surrender could destroy Justinian's entire Italian campaign. The Goths attacked. They built siege engines. They constructed towers. They attempted to force their way through the walls. But Belisarius refused to remain passive. Whenever the Goths created an opportunity, Roman soldiers struck back. Cavalry charged outside the gates. Archers fired from the walls. Engineers repaired damaged fortifications. And Belisarius constantly moved between defensive positions, watching the battle himself. The Goths expected Rome to fall quickly. Instead, the city resisted. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. And the impossible began to happen. The enormous Gothic army could not break through. Belisarius had turned the ancient walls of Rome into a weapon. But the siege was far from over. The Goths were not leaving. And soon, both sides would discover just how far they were willing to go to control the city. Because the battle for Rome had only just begun. Part 4, The Siege of Rome. The Gothic army had arrived. Rome was surrounded. Outside the walls stood thousands of warriors, determined to take back the city. Inside, Belisarius had only a fraction of their strength. But he had something the Goths did not. The walls of Rome. The ancient fortifications stretched for miles around the city. Belisarius ordered every section reinforced. Towers were repaired. Gates were strengthened. Defenders were positioned along the walls. And the Roman commander prepared for what he knew would be a brutal siege. The Goths attacked. Their first objective was the Porta Aurelia, near the Vatican. They advanced with siege engines and towers, trying to overwhelm the defenders with numbers. But the Romans were ready. Arrows filled the sky. Stones crashed down from the walls. And Roman soldiers launched counterattacks whenever the Gothic formations became disorganized. The first assault failed. Then the Goths tried another strategy. They built a massive bridge across the Tiber, hoping to bypass the Roman defenses and attack from an unexpected direction. Again, Belisarius responded. He moved troops into position and destroyed the Gothic assault. The siege continued. But Belisarius understood something important. He could not simply sit behind the walls forever. The Gothic army was larger. If the Romans waited long enough, hunger and disease could become more dangerous than the enemy outside. So Belisarius began launching aggressive sorties. Roman cavalry suddenly burst from the gates. They struck Gothic positions, destroyed supplies, killed soldiers, and then disappeared back behind the walls before the enemy could surround them. The Goths were becoming frustrated. They had expected Rome to fall quickly. Instead, every attack cost them men. Every day of the siege consumed food. And every failed assault weakened their confidence. Then came one of the most dangerous moments of the entire siege. The Goths discovered a weakness near the port of Flaminia. Their soldiers moved toward the walls. For a moment, it looked as though they might break through. Inside Rome, panic spread. But Belisarius reacted immediately. Roman troops rushed to the threatened section. The Gothic attack was stopped. The walls held. And Rome survived another day. The siege had now lasted for months. The city was exhausted. Food was becoming scarce. Disease was spreading. Civilians were suffering. But Belisarius refused to surrender. Then, unexpectedly, the balance began to change. The Gothic army itself was running out of supplies. Thousands of soldiers had to be fed. The longer they remained outside Rome, the harder it became to maintain the siege. And Belisarius knew exactly what to do. Keep resisting. Keep attacking. Force the enemy to spend its strength. Eventually, the Gothic army would have to make a choice. Stay and starve. Or leave. After months of fighting, the Goths finally broke the siege. They abandoned their camps and withdrew from Rome. The city had survived. And Belisarius had achieved something extraordinary. With a smaller army, he had defended the ancient capital against a vastly larger force. The victory transformed his reputation. But it also created a new problem. Belisarius was becoming too successful. His victories were beginning to make him more powerful. And in Constantinople, Justinian was watching carefully. Because an emperor could trust a brilliant general. But an emperor could never completely ignore the possibility that a brilliant general might one day become a rival. And while Belisarius had defeated the Goths outside Rome, a much more dangerous battle was beginning far away. A battle for the future of the Roman Empire itself. Part 5, The General Who Could Not Save Rome. Rome had survived. The Gothic army had been driven away. And Belisarius had accomplished what few commanders in history could have imagined. But the war was not over. Far from it. The Goths still controlled large parts of Italy. And now they had found a new leader. His name was Totila. He was young, energetic, and determined to destroy the Byzantine occupation. Under Totila, the Gothic resistance came back to life. Cities that had fallen to the Romans began changing hands again. The war became longer, more expensive, and far more destructive. Belisarius returned to Italy to finish what he had started. But this time, everything was different. He did not have the resources he had once possessed. The Roman army was stretched across multiple fronts. Supplies were limited. And Constantinople was constantly demanding results. Belisarius still understood how to fight. But strategy alone could not solve a war when an army lacked the men and resources to carry it out. The Goths captured Rome once again. Then Belisarius returned. And once again, Rome changed hands. The ancient city had become a symbol of the entire war. Whoever controlled Rome could claim to represent the Roman future. But controlling Rome was becoming easier than holding it. The war continued. And eventually, Justinian recalled Belisarius. The man who had conquered Africa. The man who had entered Rome. The man who had defended the city against an enormous Gothic army. Was no longer at the center of Justinian's plans. Belisarius returned to Constantinople. His greatest campaign was over. But the Gothic War continued without him. Eventually, the Byzantines would achieve victory. The Ostrogothic kingdom would collapse. And Italy would once again come under Roman imperial rule. For a brief moment, Justinian's dream seemed complete. The Roman Empire had recovered Africa. It had recovered Italy. It controlled Rome. The ancient imperial world appeared to be returning. But history had one final twist. The restoration would not last. Only a few years later, the Lombards invaded Italy. The peninsula was divided again. The dream of restoring the Western Roman Empire began to disappear. And Belisarius? He lived long enough to see the limits of everything he had fought for. He had defeated the Persians, destroyed the Vandal Kingdom, conquered Carthage, defended Rome, and brought vast territories back under imperial control. Yet he could not restore the world that had existed centuries earlier. Because Rome was no longer the Rome of Augustus. The empire had changed. The population had changed. The economy had changed. The armies had changed. And the political world around it had changed forever. Belisarius could conquer territory. But he could not turn back time. That was the tragedy of his career. He came closer than almost anyone to restoring the Roman West. But in the end, he could restore an empire's borders, without restoring the empire itself. And perhaps that is why Belisarius remains one of history's most fascinating commanders. Not because he conquered the largest empire. Not because he commanded the largest army. But because, for a brief and extraordinary moment, he made the impossible look possible.